the returning champion, Philip Goff. It's the third time you've been on, so you've definitely been on more than anyone else. Not that that's a huge achievement, but still, yeah. That's why you're the returning champion. But anyway, Philip, like anyone who doesn't know already, can you say a little bit about who you are and what you do?
I am a philosopher at Durham University, and I guess I mainly focus on philosophy of mind, consciousness. I'm interested in how to fit consciousness into our overall theory of reality. And just in general, I think I'm interested in things that are hard to fit into our standard scientific picture of the world, things like value, mathematics, abstract objects, free will. Not because I like things that don't fit in, because I want everything to fit in. It's a sort of anal thing. I want it all to fit together. How does it all fit together? So kind of things that keep me awake at night. So that's my that's me, I suppose.
Okay, well, very good. And so you congratulations on your book. This is Galileo's Error. For those people who don't know, it's now officially out on the 5th, right? It was when it officially came out.
5th in the US, 7th in the UK.
Oh, I see. Okay, And so this is a really good book, by the way. I enjoyed reading it.
Oh, that's very kind of you.
It's a very clear, concise statement of your view in a way that's accessible to people who may not be into all the familiarities of the post-Chalmers area in philosophy.
Brilliant, thanks. Yeah, well, that's what I was trying to do, is just everything's so specialized these days, and you can have ideas that are causing a lot of excitement within a particular branch of academia, but nobody knows about them outside of your particular area of philosophy even. So I was just trying to write an so I've already published an academic book called Consciousness and Fundamental Reality a few years ago, so I'm just trying to publish a really, really accessible book to get these ideas out to more people.
I think it'll work. So it'll either have one of two impacts. It'll either make people realize Pan Psychism should be taken seriously, or it'll make people think, well, so much for philosophy.
Yeah,
these ideas.
Well, at least they'll know. They'll be able to make an informed judgment about whether it's all bullshit or whether there's something to this.
I mean, you do make a good case for the role of philosophy, I think, in the book. That's one of the nice things about the book, even though obviously there's a lot I disagree with. There's still, I thought, a lot that I found to agree with. And one of the things I thought was really nice was your defense of the role of philosophy in theory choice and in scientific advances generally. So whatever side of the debate you come on, it's nice to just have a kind of clear statement that, philosophy is important. It's made some contributions.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So before I got on to the chapter where I talk about the arguments against materialism, I just imagined there's such a skepticism that even the idea that philosophy has any role to play in finding out what the universe is like, people just are bemused by that idea. They think you look to scientists who do experiments, and maybe philosophers then come in and make us feel a bit better about the world science has resigned us to, but people don't tend to think they play a role in actually finding out stuff. So before I got on to these arguments, anticipating this, I spent a lot of time discussing where philosophy can demonstrate at least negative facts. For example, Galileo's famous proof that a certain part of Aristotelian physics was incoherent. I think he's in a way perhaps one of the few philosophers who's had an argument that is almost completely uncontested. He seemed to prove this contradiction in this bit of Aristotelian physics, that heavier objects fall faster than lighter objects, that everyone believed for thousands of years, and he showed it was contradictory. He showed just sitting in an armchair, he showed it was an incoherent view. So there's at least one example where sitting in an armchair you can discover an important truth about reality, albeit a negative one.
I wonder, so I know the thought experiment and the one you describe in your books is nicely, you do a nice job of putting together where they tie the two objects together. So do you treat it as one object or two objects, right? You get different predictions from each one of those ways of thinking about it. Um, it also is the fact true that Galileo had a lot of empirical data, though. I mean, he never did the Pisa experiment, as far as I know, but he did
Yeah.
do a lot of experiments with falling bodies, especially with pendulums of balls
Yeah.
of different weights and stuff. So I wonder if it were just the philosophical aspect, would it have gained as much traction? Because it was sort of the two together, right? The internal
Yeah.
consistency plus the empirical friction.
Yeah, I imagine so. Yeah, of course. I'm never saying, of course, for finding out about consciousness in particular, physical science is absolutely crucial. I would never say we should just be sitting around trying to work everything out from the armchair. But I think you do need both together, particularly in times where there's areas of uncertainty about the rules of the game or how they should work out, such as there was at the beginning of the scientific revolution.
Right.
Galileo was not just doing experiments, but rethinking the rules of the game, reimagining the framework, the philosophical framework that underlies science, uh, and the philosophical framework he proposed, wasn't justified by experiments. It was, I don't know how it was justified. He just proposed it, and it worked, and we've been using it ever since. So I think, where things are really established, where the methodology is really established, maybe there's less of a role for philosophers. You can just get on
Right.
with the science. But where there's areas where things are a little bit uncertain, what the rules of the game are, what the framework is, you need philosophers, and I think that's particularly true, right now with the problem of consciousness. Yeah, that's why I think it's not just another scientific problem. It's a problem that arises, I think, from the philosophical framework that underlies science. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point. So, I mean, I want to get to the discussion between dualism and materialism, but I feel like we've been over that to a large extent, and there's there's some things I want to ask particularly about that are new in the book, I think. But generally, I want to ask about some of the implications of Pan Psychism and some of the things which I was sort of still puzzled about after reading the book. Um, so let's just put a pin in that. You have the whole first part of the book, which is dialectic between dualism and materialism. You think both of them fail for various reasons. So you want to explore the panpsychist option.
Yeah.
So one very basic thing I was kind of puzzled about, and this may be an easy thing to resolve, was so you take Galileo's starting point, the mental qualities go into the mind. So the question about does the tree make a sound when no one's around? He says, no, it's in the mind of the perceiver. So I was a little bit curious about what your answer to that question is. So on the panpsychist view you have, is the tree making a sound when it falls? I mean, so I just wasn't sure like what your answer to the original question was.
Right.
Because it seems like it poses a little bit of a difficulty no matter which way you go there. So I'm just curious what you
really? So why? I guess I'm a little bit have different feelings on this at different times. But why couldn't I just take the answer Galileo gives as a panpsychist, that so the sound of the tree isn't really out there in the forest, it's just in the consciousness of the person listening to it. But why can't I just give the same? Because I mean, the panpsychist view is structurally very similar to materialism, right? You've just got, you accept all the structure that physical science gives us. You just add this extra view about what underlies that structure. So what? Yeah. What? I'm curious to know why you think I can't agree with Galileo on that point, that the sound is in the consciousness of the observer rather than.
Well, I guess because maybe I was just confused about this, but it seemed like you were trying to motivate that this was kind of a mistake on his part, or that there was a mistake on the part of the somehow saying that the world was devoid of these qualities. But
think,
you're saying that, but so you're just saying you agree with them that they're in the mind, but they have to. Well, then I just don't really see what the puzzle is supposed to be.
What the error is. Yeah. So I think the error is, I think the error was, I mean, it's obviously a provocative title. I'm absolutely in awe of Galileo in so many ways for, the framework he set up has been incredibly successful. But I think I think that there's actually two errors two ways of understanding the error. One I give later on in the book, but the initial way of understanding it is designing science in such a way that consciousness is outside of the domain of science, that consciousness is essentially something mysterious and inexplicable. So that's the error. So it's not necessarily taking the qualitative. So initially we think qualities are on the surfaces of objects, colors, on the surfaces of objects, smells floating through the air, tastes in food, sounds floating and emanating through the air. Galileo strips them from the environment, from the way they seem to be in our perception. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that, but then what he does with them is he puts them outside of the domain of science, and I suppose that's what I find problematic. Although, I don't want to say like, oh, you idiot, you shouldn't have done that. Maybe it was necessary. Maybe it was necessary to carve things off for a period so that, I think what Galileo essentially did is give science a more limited, focused task of, constructing mathematical models to describe the behavior of matter. And that's gone really well. So maybe it was necessary to hive off consciousness for a few hundred years from science so we could focus on that stuff. But I think now we're getting to the point where, we need to bring it back. And yeah.
So, I mean, there's two things that I guess I would ask you about. So the first is that you do, I mean, this is a kind of error theory. Then it turns out the view that you have is that, we're wrong about the fact that there's redness in the environment.
Yeah, so I guess I don't really actually go into that in the book.
Yeah.
It's a good point. I mean, if you ask me my view, I suppose I'm happy to say in some sense we can now say sounds and colors are out there in the world, but I think we can do that only because we've redefined the concepts. So I think our initial pre-theoretical concept of color is what David Chalmers calls Edenic colors, colors as they seem to be in our experience, that the actual quality is out there on the surface of the object. I don't think colors exist in that sense, but I think now in contemporary science, when we talk about color or heat or sound being out there, we've redefined it to mean, the physical causes of our color, sound experiences.
Right.
And I'm happy I don't really. So I guess this is more or less David Chalmers' view, a sort of pluralism, that there are different color concepts.
Right.
Maybe our most natural color concepts, with respect to our most natural color concepts, I would go for an error theory. The colors in that sense don't really exist, but we can slightly revise our color concepts so that we can coherently talk about colors existing out there in the physical world. So,
I mean, so that is a kind of a weak illusionism about consciousness. It's not the strong kind of illusionism that says consciousness doesn't exist, but it is a weak sense in which the way we introspect the properties, the color is not as they really present themselves. I mean,
is that illusionism about consciousness or about color? I mean, if
illusionism is just kind of the claim that the way we introspect our conscious experiences doesn't give us a full and accurate account of their natures, or that they seem other than they are. So in this case, it would seem, I mean, I guess I find it hard to put myself into maybe I'm overstepping a couple of jumps at once. So the first is that when you introspect the color experiences, there's a sense in which they appear to be properties of the environment. That's right. But they aren't. I mean, you had to sort of force yourself back to kind of have them as be pure properties of the mind or something like that. And I guess that's a move that you can make, but it seems like a second step.
Yeah. I was talking to, again, Keith Frankish on Twitter.
Yeah, I know this is where some of this is coming from, actually. Yeah.
I guess in the book, and when I talk, so I talk all the time about consciousness involving qualities.
Yeah.
But I suppose I think that's slightly oversimplifying what I think. I mean, I guess I think maybe a color experience has a qualitative character, which we refer to when we say what it's like to have the color experience. And that qualitative character represents a quality out there in the world. So if I'm looking at a tomato having a red experience, my red experience has a qualitative character, and the but then that represents a red quality out there on the surface of the tomato. And these are maybe slightly different things. I think what we most naturally call the quality is something that if it exists, it's out there in the world. And what the conscious experience have, I would perhaps more, if I'm going to be more precise, then I'd say it's the qualitative character rather than the quality. But I tend to think for most purposes, that doesn't really matter, and it's a bit simple. If we're just getting at the problem of consciousness, I think it's just a bit simpler to talk about the qualities, and people know what you talk of experience, so people know what you're talking about. But if you want
the qualitative character is like the way it represents the quality or something, or what's the qualitative?
It is. Well, it is what it is. It's what it's like to have the experience. I think experiences are essentially defined by their character. And I think, I always talk about experience being qualitative, but actually, I'm not necessarily committed to all experiences having a qualitative character, so I mean, I believe in
cognitive phenomenology.
Yeah, cognitive phenomenology. I believe, there's these debates about, I believe there's a kind of consciousness involved in thought. So when you're thinking about mathematics, there's a kind of character to your thought, but it feels a bit wrong just linguistically to call that qualitative,
right?
Although some people are happy to. But then again, I'm just, it depends what you're trying to do, and I just think the most obvious way of pressing the problem of consciousness in a vivid way is with respect to the kind of qualitative characters we have in sensory experiences. And you can slightly oversimplify calling them qualities. So what is the qualitative? So I think there's the qualitative character, but that essentially involves representing a quality out there in the environment, and that quality out there in the environment doesn't exist,
right?
But our conscious experience represents it as though it exists, and that's what Chalmers calls Edenic.
But it doesn't. So this is where I get confused. So it's not representing a quality, since the qualities are, as you were just saying, not these kinds of properties. There's some physical property which causes in us this thing. So it's representing a qualitative character, which just sounds like you're saying.
No, it's represent
a qualitative character.
By the way, this might not make sense. These are subtle issues that I'm still sort of working out to a degree, and I'm happy to revise my view on this. But no. So the qualitative character exists. That's a property of the conscious experience,
right?
And the qualitative character represents a quality in the environment, which doesn't in fact exist.
But there are qualities in the environment. So a physically read object is physically read because it has the quality. I thought that's what you were just saying, and then
Well, that's what I mean. We've just got these different concepts of colors. I think our most natural pre-theoretical concept of color, which David Chalmers calls Edenic colors, I think, I guess I think our conscious experiences represent those, and they don't really exist. But we can slightly revise what we mean by colors to mean just, what the physical properties that cause our color experiences. And when we make that revision to our concepts, call those, color star.
Right. But that's where the weak illusionism comes in, because where the Edenic properties are represented as being qualities, not qualitative characters.
But why is that? That seems to, and I'm happy to be a weak illusionist.
That's properties of objects, not properties of experience.
But why is that illusionism about experience rather than, so that we get the experience right, that it represents qualities in the environment?
But we're wrong, but that those things exist.
Yeah.
Right.
But we're wrong about the thing out there in the world, but we're not wrong about the experience. The experience represents an Edenic color property out there in the world. That doesn't exist, but we get the experience right, that the experience represents the Edenic quality being out there in the world.
Well, we don't have access to its nature introspectively, since
To what? To the nature of what?
To the qualitative character.
Yeah, we do. Why not?
Well, because it's misrepresenting the way the external environment is. There's a sense in which our access to it is inaccurate.
No,
it's presented to us as an experience of equality in the environment.
So we get its nature right, and its nature involves what it represents, and we know what it represents. We just don't know whether that representation is accurate or not. But that's about the world outside the mind. Whether the mind's representations are accurate or not depends on the world outside the mind, not the mind itself, I think.
If they were accurate, you would have direct access to the environment. I mean, that's so in an Edenic world, that's the kind of.
Oh yeah, I suppose so.
That's how it presents things to you, and that's wrong. So there's
okay. So I suppose, yeah, we have direct access to the qualitative character and to the quality that would exist if the perception were wholly accurate, but the perception isn't wholly accurate. So not only do we know what it is for the conscious, the nature of the conscious experience, we grasp the nature of the qualitative character, we also grasp the nature of the Edenic quality out there in the world, what it would be if it existed. But it doesn't exist. But that's consistent with grasping its nature. I can grasp the nature of God while being an atheist. I can know what it is. I know what it would be for God to exist. It would be for an all-knowing, all-powerful, perfectly good being to exist. But God doesn't exist. Similarly, I can know what it would be for this Edenic color property to exist out there in the world, even though it doesn't. I think this is consistent.
Yeah, so you don't think that. So you deny that this is even a weak kind of illusionism.
I think so. Although I am happy. I've never said that we never make any mistakes about consciousness, or we never but I'm still thinking about these things, but I'm not yet seeing why this is a kind of illusionism about why we get consciousness wrong in any sense here.
Okay. I don't know. All right. So I don't want to. I mean, let's pass on that for a second. So when we're talking about so you allow for invert cases, right? I mean, you can have color inversions on the way you think of these things, or is that?
I don't talk much about color inversions. I suppose I guess it seems to me prima facie possible. Yeah. So people who have what you see. I mean, it's the old thing you have when you're a teenager. You think, oh, what I see as red might be what you see as, and we'd never know about it. I suppose prima facie that seems to me possible, but I'm open to, learning more about colors and color experience. Actually, that couldn't really happen.
Okay.
I don't know. Why do you think there's reason to think there couldn't be?
Yeah, I think it's issues complicated, but more I was going to worry about this as a kind of relation to the combination problem, which was more.
Oh right. Go on.
So I wonder if you could say a little bit, just in case people don't know what the combination problem is. This is the hard problem for Pan Psychism, which you say some interesting things about your book in your book. So I wanted to just press you a little bit on some of that stuff. But could you say a little bit about it first?
The combination, yeah. So the Pan Psychis, the essence of Pan Psychism is that the basic constituents of the physical world, perhaps electrons and quarks, have incredibly simple forms of experience. And they're the building blocks of reality, and ultimately the very complex experience of the human and animal brain is somehow derived from the simple experience of the most basic parts of the brain. there are various ways of framing the combination problem. I mean, the basic intuitive starting point is just how the hell does that happen? How do you get, we sort of have a sense of how parts of a car engine make up an engine, or parts of an organism make up a functioning organism. But how do we make sense of little minds coming together to make a big mind? That seems something that is hard to make sense of, and even something that seems unintelligible or incoherent.
Right.
So that's and there are more different ways of making more specific the challenge. I've published papers arguing that we can have a kind of conceivability argument, that you could conceive of panpsychist zombies that, physical duplicates of us, and all their parts are conscious, but there's no consciousness corresponding to the organism or the brain or whatever. And so that's nice. That's nice because it's not nice for a panpsychist. It's a pretty good way of having a devastating problematic, a big objection to the panpsychist, because panpsychists usually reject physicalism with things like the zombie argument.
Right.
And then you say, oh, we could be panpsychists instead. But then if the zombie argument comes right back at us, there's like this panpsychist zombie argument, then it seems we've got nowhere. So that's one way of pushing it. Other people, Sam Coleman's given an argument that mental combination is unintelligible. So yeah, I mean, and I think most of the effort of the panpsychist research program is trying to address this. And yeah.
So, and what do you think is the best response that you can give to the combination problem?
So in my first academic book, I talked about cosmopsychist views. I think I'm now being more attracted to a sort of well, this is not the terminology I use in the book, but I think a better terminology is to think. So you think of the combination problem as, what is the relationship between particle consciousness and systems level consciousness, right?
Right.
And roughly two possibilities are strong emergence or weak emergence. So the strong emergence view is that we need basic principles of nature, basic laws of nature to bridge the gap from particle level consciousness to systems level consciousness. Whereas the weak emergentist says, no, you don't need that. You just having conscious particles arranged in the right way is enough in itself to constitute a macro level conscious mind. I guess I'm being more attracted to the strong emergentist view, partly because I'm being less persuaded that we have empirical reason to doubt that. I think with my academic book, I was pretty persuaded that was empirically implausible, but I'm now being less persuaded of that. So, one way of working that out, as I talk about in the book, is Hedda Hassel-Merck's view, a way of interpreting the integrated information theory along these lines.
Right.
So roughly, we get the view there's just a basic law of nature that you have consciousness at the level of a system at which there's the most integrated information. I don't quite agree with that theory, but yeah, I'm less and less persuaded that there's good reason not to think there are some extra principles of nature bridging the gap. It might be partly because I'm at Durham, where there's some heterodox philosophy of science going on, like my colleague Robin Hendry, who's a philosopher of chemistry, who defends a kind of emergentist view about chemistry, and Nancy Cartwright, who's famously think we've got no reason to think this kind of reductionist picture everyone assumes, we've got no grounds for thinking. So I might be a little bit influenced here, but yeah, that's probably what I'm most inclined to now.
One question I have is why you don't feel like you kind of Mary's revenge type arguments in these cases, and why that doesn't bother you as much. So, if Mary knew all of the details about micro-physical experiences, she wouldn't be able to work out what it's like to see red. So seems like you get the similar kind of, when she sees red the first time, she's going to learn something about red she didn't know from even the complete phenomenal truths. And that seems like you don't get the same exact problem, but it seems like a similar kind of hard problem that you want, and that seems like what you want to avoid. Isn't that a cost for the theory?
Yeah, I talk a little bit about this in a forthcoming the Routledge Encyclopedia entry on panpsychism that was originally written by Timothy Sprigg, and I've done a replacement entry that I'm not sure if that's online yet. Actually, anyway,
Oh, cool.
but the way I set it up is, Pan Psychism is supposed to avoid all the problems of physicalism and all the problems of dualism. But then you might think, well, are we a strong emergentist panpsychist or a weak emergentist panpsychist? And then the worry is, if you're a strong emergentist panpsychist, you get in all the same worries dualism has about causal closure and so on. If you're a weak emergentist panpsychist, you get in all the same problems the physicalist has. So that's a nice way of seeing the dial. I mean, I'm setting up problems for myself here.
Yeah.
I guess what I ultimately say in this opinionated survey is say, in each case, the problems seem to me much less than the problems facing dualism and physicalism. I just think, in the case of the strong emergentist, I mean, if there was an immaterial, so do they have all the same problems as dualism? If there were an immaterial soul impacting on the brain every second of waking life, I'm inclined to think that would kind of really show up in our neuroscience. But if there are just some principles linking basic physical states in the brain to more complicated physical states in the brain, it's less obvious to me that would show up empirically. So that's why I think the empirical problems the strong emergentist faces are less severe than the dualist faces. Coming to the weak emergentist, well, actually, what I say in this encyclopedia piece is sort of the opposite of what you said. I said, actually, although it seems like you have a zombie argument, which we talked about earlier, I don't think you seem to have a corresponding knowledge argument. I think it's very powerful thought that, well, for a start, there seems less of a gap. So, the gap that the physicalist faces between quantitative, objective properties getting to qualitative, subjective properties, this just seems like such different kinds of concepts, whereas the panpsychist gap is just between simpler forms of consciousness and more complex forms of consciousness. And then coming to the knowledge argument, I think it's pretty just so plausible that, a colorblind neuroscientist, if you've never experienced any kind of color and you're just looking at the quantitative neuroscience, that you could work out from that what it's like to see color, just seems crazy. But if you have,
no one thinks that. That's not the view, by the way. But
oh right, what's the view?
Well, no one thinks that you should be able to work out what it's like without having the relevant concepts.
Oh right. Oh yeah, we had this.
I mean, yeah.
No, I think it's a very good. We had this discussion the first time we talked. Yeah, it's a very good point. Your emphasis on that you could have.
That's why I think it's the same with the Mary, with the panpsychist, because she has the color concepts from micro experience, but she can't work out. So there's still physicalist panpsychism is false, because she shouldn't learn anything new about the colors unless she'd be able to work out which combinations result in the.
Well, I guess it just seems more plausible that you could. I mean, so then we could talk about Mariana, right? Martina Nida Rumeland's character, who has the color. So she's in a black and white room, but someone slips her in some color samples. So she has an experience of red, experience of blue, and all the other colors. And then she has to work out which of these is the color of the sky, which of these is the color of tomato.
Yeah, that would be easy.
That would be easy?
Oh, yeah.
How so?
Well, because does she have access to her own brain? If so, then she just needs to figure out what brain state she enters in.
Yeah, that's cheating.
It's not really cheating, because it takes advantage of the structural similarities of the color space, which she knows about. So she knows that blue is more like purple than it is like pink. And so she can work out that color space, and she can work out the responses that people have, which, by the way, that's the nice work from Adam Pouch, shows that they map more closely to the structure. The brain states have a similar structure to the color space, more so than to the physical color spaces external to us.
Yeah.
So those spaces would be, I think she would be, it wouldn't be that difficult to work out which one was blue, given that she knows what blue is like and what brain states people go into when they see blue.
But that doesn't sound like she's going through her own brain. But if she just knows kind of this, I mean, could she be looking at someone else's brain, and the structure of the color spaces in someone else's brain? And
yeah, she would need to figure out from her own case what the blue was like, and so she had the concept of it, and then from there, I think the deduction is pretty much a priori.
so she knows the color from looking at the color sample. So why are you talking about looking at her own brain?
So she can try to deduce which experience she's had.
But could she look at so she has the experience from the color sample, and then she looks at someone else's brain.
Right.
Can she do it from that?
Could she do it from that without? Yeah, I mean, that's a harder case, I think. She could do it for herself. She could know which state.
That seems to me cheating, though. I mean, she ought to be getting it from the neuroscience, not sort of seeing which bit of her brain is activated.
Yeah, well, maybe, but I mean, I don't want to get dragged into this too much, but this just is debate between type A and type B physicalism.
Right.
So you push a type A, and you have an appendix on type B where you're sort of, I guess I'd say, a little dismissive of the type B strategy. But that's a big debate. And I just think the type B is perfectly good theory. So yeah, the deductions you need, they're going to go through, but not conceptually, because they sort of already admit a kind of epistemic gap.
Right. So but if we're a Pan Psychism, we're presumably going to be looking for some kind of type A thing, where there is, I suppose it just seems to me less of a gap, more plausible that you could have some kind of explanation of complex properties in terms of simpler properties, that you could deduce complex properties from simpler properties, however you want to phrase the explanatory gap, than that you could explain or deduce qualities from pure quantitative structure. I mean, that it seems more. But as I say, I'm becoming more attracted anyway to the strong emergentist view, in which case you wouldn't need the deductions anyway, because you're just postulating basic principles of nature to bridge the gap.
if it's strong emergence, I guess I don't really understand the difference between that and non-reductive physicalism.
Non-reductive physicalism. I thought you were going to say dualism.
No.
I mean, I would think of non-reductive physicalism as not requiring basic laws of nature. That's
well, it depends on how non-reductive it is.
What's the difference with dualism? I thought, so the way I think of it is, you've got identity view, that conscious states are identical with brain states, and then what's normally called non-reductive physicalism is there's no identity. You can't identify a particular conscious state with a particular brain state, but there's still constitution or grounding. The physical states still make up the conscious states without need to recourse to extra laws of nature or something. Whereas then the property dualist thinks you need basic laws of nature to bridge the gap. Isn't that? I mean, I guess this is sort of terminological, but
yeah, it just says, well, what links or what. Yeah, anyway, okay, so I agree that's the standard way of doing it. I guess I was attributing too much, but I don't really get what the what constitution is supposed to be if it doesn't invoke some kind of law linking the thing which is constituted to the thing which does the constituting. Otherwise, it's just stating something without saying anything about it.
I mean, what about people dancing and drinking constituting a party or something?
Yeah. What about it?
You don't need an extra law of nature you've got people dancing and drinking, and then you get a party out of that. But you don't need an extra law of nature. If people are dancing and drinking, then there's a party. That's just sort of...
Yeah, that's reductionism about parties.
But it's not, but you don't need identity. I wouldn't think you can identify so you've got Rod, Jane and Freddie dancing. You can't identify the state of affairs of there being a party with the state of affairs of Rod, Jane and Freddie dancing, because Rod might leave and be replaced by Susan, or so it's constitution rather than identity. But anyway, I don't know. Maybe we.
Yeah, no, I see. I guess I would just say they're different parties, and but I understand there's a lot of technical leeway here. I guess so. That's why I hate metaphysics. By the way, I know you love metaphysics, but it's like Mariology is not my cup of tea.
I don't like too much of it.
Well, you defend a lot more metaphysics than I do, but I wanted to ask about the split brain case stuff in particular. I want to steer us away from this treacherous sea towards other treacherous areas. So you suggest that split brain cases may be a reverse engineering case that we can use to bootstrap that it isn't so weird that combinations of minds can happen, because here seems like where one mind is split into two. Is that a fair way of characterizing the way you want to use that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a book aimed at a general audience, and I'm just gesturing towards Luke Roloff's work in this case, which I think, is filled out in a much more detailed way in his book Combining Minds.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's what I say in the book, but I suppose that's only gesturing at his full kind of position. But anyway, we can run with that.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm curious there. I mean, I wonder if this is just a kind of proof of principle type of claim, or how serious you take the claim that the right hemisphere is conscious. Because I think that's pretty debatable, actually. And, some people, there was just this conference on NYU on this, and there are people who defend both sides. But it seems like a lot. I mean, if something that contentious, you wouldn't want to have this much hang on it, because the conscious side is going to say, look, that's an unconscious processor over there. It's generating behavior, and it's intelligent behavior, but there's no reason to think that there's conscious experience that the right side of the brain is having.
Yeah, look, I mean, to be honest with you, I don't have firm opinions on how to understand the split brain cases. So I suppose, if we were discussing my academic book or a paper I've written, there's a position I've sort of worked out my reasons for supporting, then I could defend it. But I suppose what I was trying to do here was really just gesture at a lot of work that's going on. And, I suppose what I'm more interested in is Luke's overall position on the combination problem, which he roughly divides in, which I use the split brain stuff to link onto, which what he does is divide the combination problem into two. So one is a kind of inheritance problem. How do we get the composite whole having the experience of its parts? And the second question is the unity question. How do they have a unified experience? And with reference to the former question, he just wants to say, well, look, it's just true across the board that wholes inherit some of the properties of their parts. In a whole lot of cases, it's sort of the default position. Not always necessarily, but the mass of the whole is sort of inherited from the mass of its parts. So then the only remainder of the combination problem is making sense of why the whole has a kind of unified consciousness. And he's thinking that reflection on the split brain case might shed some light on the conditions for unified consciousness. But as to how he defends that specific interpretation of the split brain case, I'm not so sure. But I'd be interested to hear why people. I mean, I'd just be curious myself. It's something I should look more into. Why do people not? So is that not such a popular view then, that there's two subjects of experience here?
Well, I don't know what's popular or not, but it's not universally accepted. No, it's something that's contentious. I think commonsensically, people are equating the behavior, which seems intelligent, to be evidence that there's conscious experience. But if you take the idea that there can be intelligent non-conscious behavior, the so-called dynamic unconscious being one kind of example, but in general, we have some people say lots of reason to think that lots of behaviors are done unconsciously. And so there's that's entirely consistent with what's going on in the split brain case.
But But if this was a normal patient, right, not behaving in this strange way that, their left hand does something and their right hand does something, gives a contradictory answer or something.
Right.
If there was not the weird contradictory behavior, we would think this was an expression of consciousness, would we not?
No, well, it's not clear that we would. So if they deny seeing it, we usually take that as evidence that they didn't consciously see it. And so if you take a case like a neglect or something like that, where a person is ignoring something on the right side of their visual field, or the left side, I guess, is more typical or whatever. But so it's usually taken as evidence that they didn't experience it. Although people ask the question, well, how do we know they didn't experience it? There's all this debate about overflow or whatnot. But commonsensically, I don't think it's quite clear that we would say if you deny seeing it, that the behavior overrides that kind of sincere report.
But if you ask someone, did they see something, and they draw a picture of it, we tend to think that was.
In addition, if they say, yeah, I saw it, and then drew a picture, but yeah, if they say, no, I didn't see anything, and then draw a picture, then you have the issue, you have the problem.
Is there any reason to positively think there's not consciousness associated with?
Well, other than the fact that they deny having the conscious experience, yeah, no.
Right.
That's the problem. So that's why it's contentious, and people are still debating this.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's not clear how you would resolve that unless you had some kind of theory of consciousness. You could, or if you just want to say, well, look, the behaviors are too skillful or something like that. But that just seems to beg the question.
I think isn't it the case that integrated information theory, IIT, does predict that you'd have two subjects of experience?
Yeah. Well, if there's two centers of, IIT, I don't know. I don't think it's really empirically testable myself, or that's a different question. But it certainly does predict wherever there is a locus of phi, which is not subsumed in another higher phi system, then you get conscious experience. So insofar as that is going on, they would predict that. But of course, my problem with IIT is it seems like just a general criticism. It seems more to do with intelligence. It seems more to do with content of conscious states than consciousness.
All right.
So that's kind of Ned Block's general criticism of it. I think that's there are the responses to it, but I just don't think it doesn't really look like a theory of consciousness to me. It looks like a theory of being alert and aware and having some content.
Right. So why doesn't that? But I guess they claim to predict, like periods of waking, periods of sleep without consciousness, and periods of epileptic seizures where you don't have consciousness, or bits of which parts of the brain are associated with consciousness and which parts aren't.
Like, which theories don't predict that?
Right. Yeah.
They say, well, they predict that the cerebellum isn't conscious, and look, it doesn't have integrated information. But guess what? Stan DeHaan also predicts it's not conscious, and it doesn't globally broadcast its stuff either.
Yeah.
So,
I suppose it's
all the theories of consciousness are going to be able to explain that.
Yeah, I suppose it's just kind of such early days, and I guess it's trying to give what's nice about it is it's giving a nice simple put it on a t-shirt account, and you might think, well, we really don't have the evidence to support that very general claim. But you might think, on the other hand, well, what we should do is we should formulate, we very simple state on a t-shirt correlation, and then keep doing experiments, try and falsify it. And
the problem I have with IIT is that it assumes a certain theory of consciousness in the way it sets up the axioms. This is a totally different discussion, but the axioms assume a certain set of facts about consciousness, which would, like, for instance, that it's unified, or for instance, that it's a first order phenomenon, doesn't involve any kind of higher order awareness. Those are assumptions that the axioms make, and that's fine. You can have a theory which encodes your assumptions, but you shouldn't say that you're characterizing consciousness in a neutral way when you're making all these assumptions about its fundamental nature.
We had a conference on IIT in NYU a few years ago, I mean, what came out a lot of it, you could just take out what a lot of the philosophers are posing is, you could just take out thin IIT, which is just the kind of the basic claim that consciousness is correlated with integrated information or maximal integrated information, or just something in that arena, or consciousness has something to do with integrated information, and then this broader thing that involves these axioms and this starting off methodology and certain kind of metaphysical framework that Tononi likes, and
right, exactly.
He wasn't too keen on this proposal.
No, I know. I was at a workshop where he said this. Yeah, same keenness was a lack of display was not evident. Yeah.
But look, I mean, I'm enjoying chatting about these things, but just to be clear, it's not like I'm really committed to either to IIT or an interpretation of the split brain case, and it's probably.
But it does. I
should think more about the split brain cases, to be honest.
One reason to think why. I mean, so just kind of, it's as it's percolating up. One reason to think that the right side of the brain is not conscious is simply because it sort of conceptually doesn't seem to make sense to take one mind and suddenly end up with two, because we do have this kind of conception that minds are not the sorts of things that decompose into smaller minds. So it does seem like already somehow to build in a favorable answer to the question that's being asked.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe it depends. Maybe how you think about this will partly depend on your background theory of consciousness. Maybe if you've already got a theory of consciousness where there's kind of subjects of experience everywhere, then it's that might push you more in the direction of thinking there are two subjects of experience here. I guess I don't see particularly a conceptual problem with subjects splitting into two. Are you saying that's incoherent, or?
Don't know how to make sense of it. Yes. I don't know if it's incoherent, but I'm not sure that it makes sense to me, at least. I don't know what that would mean.
Yeah. You read Derek Parfit talking about fission and fusion, and seems to make sense. I don't know.
It's not two subjects. I mean, it's just it's a generation of a new subject.
Yeah. I mean, that's
not one splitting into two. It's one giving rise into another one, which we can understand.
Right. So I mean, that could be. So the two possibilities in the split brain case, isn't it? There's three possibilities. One, there aren't two subjects here. One, there are two subjects, and they resulted from a single subject splitting into two. But three, that the first subject disappears and is replaced by two new subjects. I guess you might start to worry about personal identity or.
Exactly.
But if you're, have a Galen Strawson type view of subjects of experience is not lasting very long anyway.
Right. So it seems like, I mean, that's sort of a general theme, is that as you explore these views, you end up making all the same choice points that the materialist does, or it's the same set of choices, basically. So if you're deflationist about personhood, then yeah, you can say all sorts of things. But each view requires it. Like there's a similar set of hoops that each view has to jump through at familiar points. And so it's other than the fundamental, there's consciousness at the fundamental level, so therefore it looks like less of a gap. It doesn't look like you're buying all that much with this kind of radical reinterpretation of everything.
That might be true, to largely true. I mean, I think what we're largely doing in neuroscience is mapping correlations, trying to systematize them, trying to come up with a systematic theory. But as I've said a lot, that in itself is not a theory of consciousness, even if you've got some kind of systematic account of the correlations between brain activity and consciousness. That itself is not a theory. We need a theory that explains why consciousness and physical states are correlated in this way, and just doing neuroscience isn't going to get you to that.
I mean, that's
No,
but see,
yeah.
that's the loading. I don't want to cut you off, but when you're getting ramped up here, but that's preloading the dice. So the alternative is that you don't get explanation. I mean, you posit identities in order to get explanations. So you don't get the explanations without positing the identity. So why do we identify water and H2O? Because otherwise we can't explain how water freezes. So otherwise we would just have this weird, if we had a correlation there, we would explain why H2O freezes, and then it would be like, oh, it's correlated with water freezing. Well, that's too weird. So we identify the two, and then we get the explanation. But it doesn't go the other way, which is sort of what you seem to be requiring.
I wasn't meaning to rule that out. I would take that to be one explanation. So neuroscience gives us correlations, and then we have to give an explanation of those correlations. One explanation is identity, right? Okay. I suppose I have philosophical problems with those kinds of identities, but that's something we'd have a philosophical argument about. But what I'm saying is, I mean, it could be, I think it's important to move beyond the correlations in neuroscience, just because it's important to have a worldview that's consistent and explains what we find, the data we find. But it might be that to a large extent, it doesn't make a difference actually in practice to building the theory of consciousness. I mean, it's like, quantum. I find it's very similar to the case in quantum mechanics, where you've got the equations and the way of predicting what's going on that so much of our technology relies upon, and then but you think we need an explanation of what the hell is going on, what's going on in reality, and you've got your different theories, many worlds, Copenhagen, Bohmian, and so on. And some physicists think, well, why are we worrying about all this? That doesn't make any difference to what we're actually doing. But I think it is important to. Science isn't just about building bridges and curing disease. It's about having a worldview that makes sense of the data and explains what our best guess about what reality is like based on that. So even if, as you say, panpsychism wouldn't, it could be a lot of the time it doesn't make a difference to doing the neuroscience, whether we're panpsychists or materialists or dualists or whatever. So I think it's still an important fight between those different positions. But it could be that it does make differences, right? It could be that you're more likely to interpret the split brain case in one way than another. It could be that, especially if you're a weak emergentist panpsychist, it could be that you're trying to build models of explanation here. It might make a difference whether you think you're a strong emergentist in either in a dualist or a panpsychist sense, and you think certain levels have a kind of autonomy, that might make a difference to what kind of theory. So, so I think it could make a difference at a number of points, but even if it doesn't, I still think it's important to work out the most plausible theory of what's going on.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But I mean, so I guess let me leave that, because I can get hung up on this all day, and I know you have limited time today. So I want to ask about a couple other things. There's two things I want to talk about, at least. Hopefully we'll have time to touch on them. But one is your view about plants, which I think is a very interesting part of the book. You talk about Monica Galeano's work, which I've talked to her. I think her work is really interesting and good. And then I also want to ask about some things about string theory, which I've asked you about before, but I think there's still kind of an issue there. So I wanted to touch on and see what your claims there were. So I want to try to get to
do I talk about string theory in the book?
No.
All right.
But that's going to be one of my points, is that that you should.
I just think I don't remember
and it seems like there's kind of an objection that I would say starts from thinking about string theory.
All right. Okay. Sounds cool.
But first I want to talk about the plants.
Okay.
Because I think it's, first of all, the point of agreement, I think it's important. And what's nice about your book is that you highlight this important work about what we're learning about plants, that they're actually a kind of intelligent system, which should not be that surprising if you really endorse evolution. Given it doesn't seem all that surprising that we're going to find, in between cases along the way. And so, but people are generally not very aware of this work and very skeptical, attributing any sorts of these properties of plants. So I think that's very cool that you touch on that. What I guess the part where I disagree with you is, and maybe this is just rhetoric in the book, but you say, look, it's only a prejudice that's going to stop us from assigning mental lives to the plant. And so the way I wanted to challenge that was that what I think the science shows is that plants can be conditioned, they can learn, they can retain information, which are all the things that we know can be done unconsciously in humans, right? Classical conditioning doesn't require any consciousness. You don't have to be aware of the stimulus or anything like that to get those sorts of behavioral dispositions. So is it all that surprising that we find some kind of what we typically think of as non-conscious learning in plants? Why should we leap from that to assigning a consciousness to them, I guess would be the question.
Yeah. I mean, well, I will argue back with you, but again, just to emphasize in the start, I suppose, in contrast to what I've written in academic book and academic papers, that that I'm more sort of loose in just trying ideas out, and
Right. Okay.
it's not necessarily like I'm really strongly committed. And I partly just wanted to, as you say, talk about the really interesting work that I think people are completely unaware of, that the extent to which there's a interaction of trees under the ground,
Right.
Passing back and forth food and minerals, and
Preferential
redistribution,
distribution for the young.
preferential to their own young, and redistribution between species. It's an incredible thing that the evergreen trees during winter give to the, is that the right way around, give to the just deciduous trees, and it's reciprocated in the summer and so on. But yeah, maybe I don't want to stand by that. Maybe that was a bit overblown, that way of putting it. I suppose I do really believe plants are conscious, actually, and I wouldn't not so like it's an interesting question. Do you believe you're philosophical? I just saw a paper was published on whether it's immoral to philosophically defend views you don't believe. And,
I know.
anyway.
I saw that. Yeah.
And then they ended up saying, do I believe the argument I'm making here? Doesn't matter. But what was I saying? Yeah, I do think panpsychism is our best guess, but whether that's strong enough to actually believe it, I'm not sure. But I do actually believe plants are conscious, and I suppose I just think I can't see the principled reason why we're drawing the distinction between animals being conscious and plants being not conscious. I kind of, especially seeing I'm more attracted to a sort of emergentist view. Why does that make a difference? I don't know why that seems to make a difference to me. But yeah, I guess I'm just suspicious of the grounds for our thinking that plants are not conscious.
So what are those grounds?
Well, exactly. What do you think? Why do you think we do doubt consciousness of plants?
Why do I think that?
Yeah. What do you think are? I guess I just don't think there is any good reason to make the distinction between conscious things and non-conscious things at that point. Okay. I don't think there is any good reason to.
But so what I'm asking is what are the lack of good reasons? Is it because they process information? Is it because they're behaviorally responsive to the environment, or is it just because they're alive, or what is it that singles them out and not like chairs and
I mean, it might be sort of more
the sun,
more like a kind of Sorites case. If you kind of get to simpler and simpler forms of life, I think common sense draws a gray area. Like, do you think flies are conscious? Do we think bed bugs have some kind of inner life? And I sort of think any point where we sort of draw a line there just seems kind of arbitrary and probably based on just anthropomorphic considerations, or assuming that so I just can't.
The argument that I alluded to earlier, namely that the things that these guys do are the things that can be done unconsciously, so probably they're doing it unconsciously.
So you think that would not be true of things that mice do, for example?
Well, in terms of classical conditioning, I think it's true, but I think they do more than that. So it's just the type of things that plants can do are the types of things that we have very good reason to think occur without consciousness.
It's a good argument. Look, I might have to think more about it, but I mean, is it always the case that when organisms are doing these things, it's not always the case that they are done unconsciously, right?
As far as I know, classical conditioning is always
classical conditioning, right.
bypass is conscious.
Right.
Yeah, just a different set of brain systems. I mean, it depends on, I guess it depends on your views, but as far as I know, I mean, this is not a controversial claim. I'm willing to be wrong, though. I actually don't, in the view of the sciences. These things, I mean, so just as a related question, so, what about Roomba? A Roomba is the robot vacuum cleaner, my favorite example of a friendly robot. Right. Are you going to say Roomba is conscious too? I mean, I know your view is consistent with AI conscious or artificial consciousness, but how far are we going to push this? I mean, are you going to end up saying thermometers are conscious and like flies because they're like simple? So I'm just wondering what the principled reason for thinking one but not the other would be on a view like yours.
Yeah, I suppose it's just, I mean, this is something I need to think about more. I suppose it's just, if you're thinking of, going back in evolutionary history, any point of drawing a line between where consciousness begins seems kind of arbitrary. Whereas, in the case of building something artificial from scratch, it's just, it's not come from that lineage. It doesn't have that. It's not on that chain of, and so that kind of Sorites type concern doesn't seem to apply to it. But yeah, I mean, like these are all views. Have a very low credence on.
It gets to kind of one of the claims that you want to make a lot, which is that spoons aren't conscious on your view, but trees are. So it seems like there's a kind of bias towards living systems in your thinking, which is a normal common sense thing. I mean, I feel it too, but it's I'm not sure if Roomba is alive or counts as artificial life. It gets hard to draw those kinds of distinctions. And I teach a class on life in the universe. One of the questions is the sun alive is a hard question. It does a lot of the things that living things do, stars do. So it doesn't have a metabolism. It's not made out of DNA, which I guess is really the default biological consideration. So if it doesn't have DNA, then but that's just really arbitrary, shutting the discussion down. It's not clear that we really do have a good principled demarcation between the living systems and the non-living systems.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so one issue is, it does make a difference in a panpsychist context, I suppose. The question is, do you have a genuine higher level entity, I mean, if you're thinking in an emergentist framework, I suppose, do you have a genuine sort of emergent entity, I guess Leibniz's distinction between natural unities and mere aggregates.
Right.
If you're thinking in a sort of strong emergentist framework, you've got some what we think of as entities that are really just aggregates of micro level objects, and then some things that are genuine unities. And I suppose so if you're not a panpsychist, you might think, okay, the plants are genuine unities, but are they conscious? Maybe they're not conscious, and maybe. But I guess if you're in a panpsychist framework, as soon as you accept that it's a genuine unity, that there's a sort of irreducible macro level entity, then you're going to think it's conscious. So I suppose, and I'm just thinking on my feet here, I suppose partly I'm inclined to think plants are genuine unities rather than mere aggregates, whereas your pet robot might be just a mere aggregate, and if it's a genuine unity,
well, he's not a pet; he's a vacuum cleaner.
Oh, sorry, the vacuum cleaner. Sorry.
Yeah, okay, that's.
I thought it was your little friend.
Yeah, well, they're actually quite friendly, but they're vacuum cleaners. Okay, so I guess I'd have to know about what about this unity stuff is. I mean, part of the problem, it seems like if you have an answer to the combination problem, you should be able to deduce this stuff, right? This stuff should be knowable
Not
a
on a
priori.
not on a strong emergentist
Right, on a
view.
strong, but that's even weirder. But if any sort of plausible view, well, because I mean, it's just kind of ironic, I think, that you spend a lot of time hounding the materialist saying, well, you can't deduce these things. And then at the end of the day, say, yeah, well, maybe we can't deduce them. Like, okay. It just seems like you give up the game to me.
No, but
You can say, they can say, and you say, well, yours is a little bit weirder. I don't know. I think yours is a little bit weirder. So, what's weirder, that we can give a complete account of qualitative properties in quantitative terms, but not understand how the two are linked, or that we can give a complete account of macro phenomenal properties in terms of micro phenomenal properties, but not understand how the two are linked?
No, but it's different because so when physicalists, if you're talking about the type B physicalist view, when they say we can't give the link, it's because they think there's an empirical identity. There's an
Right.
a posteriori identity. I guess that, I have what I take to be strong philosophical objections to that kind of identity, the kind of, we haven't got into that. We've talked about that a lot. So I think I've got strong objections to that position, but I don't have strong objections to, say, a dualist view like David Chalmers' view, where you just say, sure, you can't, the identities don't work, but we can postulate basic laws of nature to bridge the gap. I mean, that seems to me a perfectly coherent view. The worries about it on the dualist view would be, A, is it empirically plausible? B, you get a kind of bifurcated, inelegant, unparsimonious picture of the world where it's, you just get this consciousness suddenly appearing a very different kind of property in a tiny part of the universe. So I think
So you get all that stuff on your view. The macro phenomenal property is a different kind of property. It's phenomenal, but it's a different kind of property than the micro ones. Whatever the experience of red is, it's not unimaginably simple.
Yeah, it's determinable, determinants of the same determinable, to use the terminology, it's the jargon. So yeah, it's different forms of the same general property. So I think that's still a simpler, more universal.
I think you're kind of just glossing over the fundamental problem, which is how all of these individual experiences, which have their own individual subjects of the experience, come together to form something which has only one subject, and which is an experience of red. That just seems totally a strong emergentism. That's totally ununderstandable, and I don't see how the gap is lessened by saying, oh, well, it emerged from something phenomenal, so it's less of a problem.
So I think I wasn't saying that. So I think that there are a number of different. So one advantage of the panpsychist view is the explanatory progress we have just thinking at the level of the brain state and the conscious state. There's this weird, what's the relationship between the two? I don't buy the sort of materialist identity view. What's the relation between the two? The dualist says they're different things, and that leads to empirical problems. But what the this is just what I guess the more general Russellian monist says, is that the conscious state is the intrinsic nature of the brain state. The brain state is, when we talk about brain states, we're talking about behavior, what it does. The consciousness is its intrinsic nature. So I think that's a really beautiful, elegant way of resolving the correlations just at this macro level, and that is already, I think, great explanatory progress. Then we got a question: what's the relationship between that level and the more basic parts?
But that's the whole. I mean, that's the whole crux of the issue. So the advantage of materialism is that you get to explain how pains cause the behaviors, the feeling of pain, the painfulness of pain, the awfulness of pain.
Yeah.
Because it is the brain state, it has the brain state's causal powers. You want to say something which tries to piggyback off of that, which is that
Yeah.
the intrinsic nature of the brain state is a kind of phenomenal experience, but the intrinsic nature of the brain state is not pain.
It is.
The macro level state is pain. The intrinsic
But
nature
that's
of the particles is not pain, which somehow combine to form pain. And so you're not ultimately, it's not clear which is doing the causal work, whether the causal powers drain into the micro particles or not.
Yeah, so it depends how we understand causal closure.
Yeah, exactly.
Do we understand causal closure that everything has a physical cause, or does everything have a microphysical cause?
Right.
So yeah, so if you think it's everything has a microphysical cause, then yeah, you've ruled out the strong emergentist panpsychist view.
Right.
But if you think it's everything has a physical cause, you've ruled out dualism, but you haven't ruled out the panpsychist view, the emergentist panpsychist view, because they can say, yeah, everything has a physical cause. Conscious states, are brain states, even if that macro level conscious state stroke brain state is not reducible to what's going on at the micro level. And I guess I'm less persuaded that we have any reason to think that micro reductionist view that I mean, what would it look that everything the cerebellum does can be completely explained in terms of its quarks and operating just according to the four basic force, the basic principles of physics. What would that look like if it was true, or would it look like if it was false? I'm less convinced we have reason to think that.
Yeah.
Even though we might still have reason to think, if dualism were true and there were these utterly non-physical properties making things happen, then that might show up in our neuroscience. So I'm and as I say in the book, we know that there are things like quantum entanglement, which entails that. I mean, I think the best way to understand that is there's some kind of holism, that there's some kind of properties of the whole. I mean, that's the way we define quantum entanglement, right? That there's the quantum state of the whole is not reducible to the quantum state of the parts. So, I mean, I'm not saying that this has that there's quantum entanglement in the brain or anything, but we know that that's a kind of plausibly a counterexample to microreductionism. So so the advantages of the view, I do agree that the strong emergentist panpsychist faces something like the troubles of dualism. The weak emergentist panpsychist faces something like the troubles of physicalism. But I just think in both cases they're less they're less obvious, and the strong emergentist panpsychist is, even though it like the dualist, like the David Chalmers style dualist, it has these brute laws, and that's you'd prefer to do without them maybe, but I think it's more empirically plausible, it's more parsimonious, it's more elegant and unified. You've got more of an explanatory thing at the macro level. So yeah, I mean, none of these theories are perfect, but I think
I still don't know why. Well, anyway, I don't want to get re-hung up on this, but it's I don't know why, on your view, you shouldn't have introspective access to the micro phenomenal properties.
Well, if there's strong emergence, you should.
Yeah, but now it seems like a lot's really depending on the strong emergence. If you're weak emergence views, seems like it should go through.
I'm not really. I think on the weak emergence, even on the weak emergence view, I'm not really worried about the sort of epistemological worry you have, because I think my view is, as we grasp the nature of the I had something to say to you about transparent concepts. I might talk about, anyway, probably haven't got time. We grasp the nature of the macro level state. I don't see that. I don't think that entails we grasp the nature of what constitutes it.
Well, if that's what it is, then
that's what constitutes it. We're back to the metaphysics. The difference between identity and constitution. You can grasp
the non-different.
You can grasp what a statue is without grasping, the nature of the materials making it up or something.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
Let me try to transition to the. I mean, we're almost really out of time, but really quickly to the string theories. Oh, yeah, right.
yeah,
Maybe.
that's. I'd like to hear what I'd like. It sounds interesting.
So, first there's the general issue of whether there are, in string theory, objects, and one possible answer is probably not. But more generally, I think that one of the things that we've learned from string theory is the concept of a duality, that there are certain theories under certain descriptions which are dual to other theories with different descriptions. In the most famous case, all of our theories of string theory are supposed to be somehow approximations of some deeper M theory, which has 11 dimensions, whereas these other theories have 10 dimensions. So, but these theories are empirically equivalent, and yet they have very different parts. They're built out of different things. So it seems to me like if this is the way reality is, and if there's a big debate about this, but then it looks like you might have a problem for the kind of theory that you have, because if you have some basic element which you want to identify as being the having the intrinsic nature of a conscious experience, in a different dual theory, it's going to be a different property, and so a different experience. So it looks like you get a kind of contradiction in the view that if string theory is true, you're going to end up having to say that there are, different kinds of micro experiences postulated when there shouldn't be. So
that's really interesting. I mean, that might be something I have to think about a little bit more. But let me say something I've just finished writing a paper on that's perhaps kind of related and might give a partial answer to what you're saying is. So I've been thinking about. I wrote a paper on this is gonna be this volume on quantum mechanics and consciousness.
yeah,
I'd like to write something for that, and I was writing about this wave function monism. So the view that the fundamental level of reality, there's just the wave function, which is taken to be this field in very high dimensional probability space. It's sort of like relative to the physical universe. It's possibility space, I meant to say. You've got each location corresponds to a configuration of particles in what we think of as physical space. And the number of dimensions is, you take the number of particles in the universe, times it by 3. That's the number of dimensions. That's really
cool.
So a lot of people like Alyssa Ney and David Albert think this is the most straightforward interpretation of quantum mechanics. But then there are these debates with other philosophers of physics, like mine's gone blank now. Anyway, it doesn't matter. About whether you can get kind of tables and chairs and stuff out of this, and what I was considering is, so one thing Alyssa Ney says at one point is, okay, maybe we can't get tables and chairs out of this, so maybe we just have to say they don't exist. Maybe we just have to, and I was talking about that a little bit, but saying, well, whether or not that's true, one thing we do have to account for is consciousness, right?
Right.
And maybe we should see that as a kind of constraint on these theories. And people, but I do think philosophers and scientists of the future will think it's incredible that we didn't think more generally about the ontological implications of consciousness. You've got this thing we know pretty much for certain exists. In our theorizing about the fundamental nature of reality, we don't spend much time drawing out its ontological implications. So I was thinking, I think it's a struggle of getting the facts about consciousness, human consciousness as we know it, out of the wave function. I mean, it's a big argument, especially if you can't get ordinary objects. On any theory of consciousness, if you can't kind of get brains or so I think I'm attracted to more of the Bohmian type view now, where you have the wave function and particles,
right.
yeah, and
I mean, that certainly is not the simplest view.
So, well, but simplest view, I just think
By the
You
way,
know,
I just want to plug that, we all know that relativity and quantum mechanics have to be reconciled. So talking about field theories and quantum mechanics is fine, but string theory is a possible reconciliation of those. And
right,
if it's
right.
true, then all the things you're talking about, I mean, one of the great hope of string theory is that at the fundamental level, there are no free parameters in the theory at all. Everything is determined by the theory. So these things are going to dissolve away if that approach is right. So it's fine to talk at that level, but we all know these are effective theories at the moment, that they're not the final theory. So I don't think quantum mechanics is wrong. I'm not saying that, but it's a bit
Well, look,
one-sided.
in that sense, anything's up for grabs. But I mean,
Well,
what
but
I'm
string
suggesting,
theory makes some constraints here. So that's the kind of
right,
point, is that one of the things that it sort of seems to be telling us is that there doesn't seem to be good candidates for these objects that we're talking about. It does make a kind of case for a sort of scientific realism. So maybe you have some sort of structural realism, which kind of falls down. We talked about that last time. But the point here is that any way you want to identify the experience with a certain physical property, there's going to be another theory in which all the same predictions are made, but that property is absent. And so a different conscious experience would seem to be possible. And that's just that doesn't go away. One of the dualities is when you start talking about things that are very small, suddenly it's dual to a theory where the distance is increasing, where the space is getting larger. So, I mean, it's just a fundamental feature of the theory.
but there
And it
are
doesn't seem
different
like what you're
options
saying
here.
really addresses that.
I've just been reading, Sean Carroll's view, where he thinks we should start off with the wave function and try and get space and time and gravity from that. So rather than taking the string theory route, so I mean, nobody really knows how this is going to end up.
Right.
All I'm saying is, I think we should take the need to account for consciousness as a constraint on theorizing, and that's what I'm most passionate about. I suppose that we tend to think the job of science is to account for the data of observation experiment, but I think there's an extra datum we know exists, and that accounting for that should be part of the job of the theory. We should look for the simplest theory that accounts for both. In terms of fundamental physics.
But that's the weird part, is that consciousness is a biological, psychological property. Seems like you'd want to look for explanations there.
No, we should have I'm not assuming Pan Psychism at this point. We should have a theory that is consistent with, consciousness existing at the biological level. And it's not obvious to me that some of these wackier physical theories can do that, such as wave function monism, for example. And you might think, oh, it's very parochial and dragging us back to the past. But consciousness is something, the thing we're most certain of, in my view, and so it should be a serious constraint. So actually, interesting enough, I've been Skyping a prominent physicist who has secret views on consciousness. I'm not sure this person wants to go public. Yeah, is it quite at this point? But does think, is someone who's prominent on these deep theoretical challenges in physics, reconciling gravity and quantum mechanics and so on, and thinks a theory of consciousness as a fundamental feature of reality will help us make progress, and these things will go hand in hand. A theory of consciousness as a fundamental feature of reality and sorting out these deep, quantum gravity, will make progress together. So that, I mean, look, these are deep troubles, and no one knows. It's for decades now. No one knows how to move forward on these things, and I don't know.
That's sort of. I guess I'm more optimist about string theory. I think that part of the reason why people are optimistic about it is because for decades now, the kind of progress that's been made in physics has been constraints of consistency and theoretical simplicity. So the standard model was worked out before it was empirically confirmed on the basis of consistency. Like there had to be all of these families of properties, and people are like, okay, so then they found them, which was great for the theory. But string theory is just a logical kind of completion of that project. So I'm not an expert. So for me, it's very hard to understand there's this kind of only game in town argument, which I take very seriously, which is given what we know empirically, if you try to build a theory which isn't a string theory, you fail. I don't see anyone that has succeeded at that.
I'm really into simplicity constraints as well, but I think there's a powerful simplicity argument for Everettian wave function monism on the grounds that it's the simplest interpretation of quantum mechanics. So other physicists want to start with that and build everything else. I mean, I thought people were losing faith with string theory because there's all these different ways of running the mathematics, and we don't. But anyway, I mean, you've got to go for simplicity, but you've got to go for the simplest theory consistent with the data. And well, I'm repeating myself now, but I think no one's been thinking seriously about whether these theories are compatible with the reality of consciousness. And so,
but I think for good reason. Consciousness is a psychological property. That's where we first look. It seems like a misguided. No, it just seems strange to go, okay, consciousness, so let's look at physics. It just looks like you're barking up the wrong tree there. Now maybe you could be convinced into looking up that tree, and I think you have been, and that is fine. I'm not disparaging the ultimate view, but it just seems like you have to be pushed into that view. That's not natural.
No, but look, no, there are these debates, live debates about whether you can get, whether we can deduce ordinary macro level three-dimensional objects out of, say, wave function monism. That's what I've been thinking about more than string theory. I don't know what to, and you might say, well, who cares? Maybe there aren't three-dimensional objects, but we can't say who cares about consciousness. So insofar as there's live disputes that philosophers of physics take, so what's his name? Maudlin, is it Maudlin?
Yeah, Tim.
Tim Maudlin, rejects wave function monism because he thinks you can't account for three-dimensional objects. You can't ground three-dimensional objects in this theory, and three-dimensional objects are the evidence we have for physics. Right. So he thinks it's sort of empirically incoherent in a certain sense. So I think that's a respectable debate, and in that context, I think, one crucial way of framing that, and you could frame it in terms of in relation to evidence, if you like. You might think of our evidence as fundamentally about the experiences we have. So yeah, it's a live debate about, we've got to be thinking, a lot of people are thinking about whether we can get our ordinary world of experience out of these things. It's a bit difficult to understand how we think about that question. One way of making it more precise and more focused is we've got to be able to get our conscious experiences out of it. We've got to be able to get our macro level conscious experiences. And it's just, I'm not assuming Pan Psychism or anything. I'm just saying your theory of the bottom has to be consistent with what we find at the top. And it's not obvious it is with some of these more.
Or you just invoke strong emergence and go on with your life.
Okay, that's another option. Yeah, that's another option. Can I just say something very briefly?
Of course, yeah.
No, I was just thinking, we were discussing last time about transparent concepts. So my view, that we grasp the essential nature of conscious experiences, or and you were raising these issues of all this evidence that we get our conscious experience wrong.
Yeah,
I was thinking, I need to think about this more, but maybe I'm just happy to say, so I am happy that we make all kinds of mistakes about our conscious experience. Maybe we can just frame the transparency claim as, insofar as we accurately, I don't know quite how to put it, insofar as we accurately track a particular phenomenal property, we grasp its nature. Insofar as we accurately hone in on a particular phenomenal property, we grasp its nature. So, we might get it wrong in all sorts of ways, but insofar as we get it right, we grasp its nature. And that might sound like kind of cheating, but I don't think it is, because I don't think it is, though, because everyone agrees, we get it right,
like
we get it wrong.
Knowledge is ungettered true belief.
No, but I'm not trying to give a definition of accuracy or something. But most physicists, most physicalists rather, think even when we get it right, we're still not grasping the metaphysical nature of it.
Right.
So it's a substantive claim to say when we get it right, we're grasping the metaphysical nature. And that sounds right to me. So, so my claim is conscious experience is essentially defined by their character.
Mhm.
And insofar as you are able to attend to and reflect on that character, the character, namely, what it's like to have the experience, I think you grasp its nature because you grasp its character, you grasp what it's like to have the experience, that is to grasp its nature. But that doesn't mean we always attend to the character accurately.
Right.
I don't have to say that. I can just say, insofar as we attend to the character accurately, we grasp the essential nature of the experience.
Yeah,
So it kind of
I
sounds
don't.
cheating and ad hoc, but I don't think it is.
Yeah, I don't. Not like someone who endorses the Frankish line or the Dennett line, which says that if it's possible you can make a mistake, then you never know that you aren't making a mistake. I think that's really a lot of what they want to push boils down to that. If it's possible you're a zombie, then you can't know you're not a zombie. It's like, yeah, actually, I can have good knowledge that I'm not a zombie, even though it's possible that, in some senses, duplicate of me, maybe. I don't agree with that, but that's possible. But
I thought you were using these examples to attack my view about that phenomenal concepts are transparent. I'm suggesting a way of understanding that claim which is consistent with any kind of or mistakes we make all the time about our experience. That was the point.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm responding to your objection to my view.
I thought my objection was that the transparency is just due to an aspect of its nature. You transparently have access to its experiential nature, but not to its metaphysical nature.
I think I was thinking of a different objection. In the discussion with Keith Frankish last time, I thought you were raising these times we get our experience wrong, and I thought you were raising it as a counterexample to the claim that phenomenal concepts are transparent. Or maybe I've misremembered.
Yeah, I'll have to check back on that. I don't. Doesn't seem like maybe I was trying to help Keith or something, but doesn't seem like.
Okay.
I don't generally.
Maybe I've got the wrong guy.
I do think that we make mistakes. I do think that sometimes we have good grasping of the experiential content. So I'm open to there being direct phenomenal concepts and those sorts of things. What I think that I object to is that you have transparent access to their metaphysical nature, which seems to be where the problems start. Because even on your view, you don't really have direct access to their metaphysical natures, just to their experiential natures. Since you can, on strong emergentism, you can have invert cases, the same micro properties with different macro properties. So you don't really have access to that level as the theory predicts. And even on the weak one, it's not clear that you can't have these kinds of cases too. So if you don't have introspective access to the micro phenomenal properties, then I think that you have to admit you don't really have transparent access to their metaphysical natures.
I don't agree with that. I mean, I think the experiential nature is the metaphysical nature, is what it is its essential nature.
But it can't. It can vary with that other stuff.
But you're talking about what underlies it.
Right.
Even in the weak emergentist case, I think we've got a distinction between the conscious state itself and what underlies it, and especially in the strong emergentist case, where it's a kind of causal relationship. There's absolutely no reason to think grasping the nature of the macro level state should involve grasping the nature of its parts. But I should probably.
Yeah, I don't see that. If that's what it metaphysically is, then if you have access to its metaphysical nature, you should grasp it. It's otherwise that's not what it is.
What it is. There's the distinction what it is and what grounds it. I can understand what a heart is.
To talk that way, but that's fine, I guess. It doesn't really. It sounds like you're saying the problem over, but with just fancy words that people like to use, like grounding.
Right.
But you're just giving a name to the problem. That's exactly so. What?
Well, I think I've given a fairly detailed account of what grounding is, and
but you haven't. You've just said that it's somehow depends on it, but asymmetrically. but
like
not. But you can't say how, so it's a big question.
I mean, take intuitive cases like you know, you can know there's a party going on, and you can know what it is for a party to go on, without knowing which specific people are realizing that party, or you can know, you know, what a statue is without knowing the material that makes it up, or what a heart is without knowing the specifics of biology that underlies it. So yeah, I mean, I think in all these cases,
I don't think you can. So you can't know what a statue is without knowing something about its physical constitution.
What it is for there to be a statue, I suppose the
So if you grasp the nature of a particular statue, you don't just grab some abstract thing about the statue.
I suppose it's a bit of ambiguity.
So if you're talking about grasping the nature of an experience in general, that's fine. If you're talking about this introspective access I have to this experience now, it seems like the cases are different. So it'd be very hard to say, I know the nature of this statue, but I'm confused about whether it's marble or brass.
I'm not meaning to dodge the question, but as you know, my
I know.
aunt is visiting, and
I have karate, not for me, but for my 4-year-old. So yes, we do have to bring this to an end at some point. But as always, Philip,
that must be super cute. A 4-year-old doing karate.
It's pretty hilarious. They watch them do jumping jacks. That's just flag sparring is like the highlight of everyone's day there when they put on the little football flags and have to run around and grab them from each other. It's pretty hilarious. They get all into it. Sometimes they're very polite. Like one little girl walked up to the other kid and was like, "Excuse me," and she was like, "Sure," and lifted up her arm and she took the flag. It's all very polite. Yeah, so it's very cute. But anyway, I know I want to let you go, and we could talk about this all day. I know you're an interesting person to talk with, and you have great ideas. So I want to thank you for joining me today again. Is there any final comment or last word you want to get in before we sign off?
Not really. Thanks it's been enjoyable for a third time, as always. And I need to think more about, what do I need to think more about? Something you said I need to think more about.
Yeah. That's always the case, Philip.
Your way of construing the knowledge argument. I said I'd think more about that the first time, and then I forgot to.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah.
But anyway, thanks again. I really appreciate it, Philip. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, Richard. Take care. Bye-bye.
Let me end the broadcast. All right. So we're